Mafia boss secretly entered his own restaurant and froze hearing manager Humiliate black waitress. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where the usual buzz of the restaurant was almost replaced by a hushed energy. The ambient sound of clinking glasses and murmurs of conversations filled the air, but tonight something felt different. Emma, a young black waitress in her mid-20s, moved between tables with grace, though her mind was far from the elegant plates and pristine silverware she carried. Her thoughts were elsewhere, consumed with the usual worries that came with working at the upscale restaurant. How to keep a smile plastered on her face while enduring the subtle racism that had plagued her for months. Her supervisor, a man named Darren, had always been cold towards her. But tonight, he seemed especially irritable. As she approached his table to drop off a bottle of wine, his voice cut through the air with an edge that made her stomach tighten. "Emma," Darren said, his tone dripping with disdain, "don't you know how to do this properly? You look like you've never handled a bottle of wine in your life." Emma's face flushed. She had been working here for over a year, serving high-profile customers, yet every time Darren spoke to her, it was as if she was invisible, unworthy of even the slightest respect. But she didn't respond. She couldn't. It was easier to stay silent than to risk her job. Tonight, though, was different. As she turned away from the table, a wave of emotion washed over her. She fought the tears that threatened to spill, her hands shaking as she set down the wine glasses. She didn't deserve this. But this was her life, being constantly overlooked, belittled, and made to feel small. She had to keep it together. She had to survive. Unbeknownst to her, however, a different set of eyes was watching the entire exchange. The large, imposing figure of Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss who owned the restaurant, had been seated at a private table in the back corner. He was usually a shadow in the restaurant, often avoiding the spotlight, preferring to observe from a distance. But tonight, he had decided to visit his restaurant unannounced. From his seat, Dominic had witnessed Darren's treatment of Emma. His eyes narrowed as the words were exchanged. He had always prided himself on fairness, especially when it came to his employees. He had built his empire on respect, loyalty, and a code of honor. But this was a violation of everything he stood for. As the exchange ended and Emma walked away, fighting to hold her composure, Dominic made a decision. He was no longer going to be a passive observer. This was the moment for change. Dominic stood up from his seat, his presence commanding the room. Every eye in the restaurant, including Emma's, shifted toward him as he began walking toward the front of the restaurant. The quiet murmurs of the guests seemed to fade into the background as the powerful figure of the Mafia boss made his way toward the scene that had just unfolded. The tension in the room was palpable, and Emma couldn't help but notice the sudden shift in energy. Darren, who had been smugly watching her from his seat, froze as Dominic approached. He had no idea what was coming, but he could feel the weight of the Mafia boss's gaze locking onto him. Dominic's voice, low and controlled, echoed through the room. "Darren," he said, his eyes never leaving the manager's. "You're fired." The words hit like a thunderclap, and Darren's face turned pale. The restaurant went silent, all attention now on the unfolding drama. Emma, standing near the bar, blinked in disbelief. She had never imagined that something like this would happen. But as Dominic's cold, calculating eyes shifted to her, the tension in her chest slowly began to lift. He stepped closer, his gaze softening as he approached her. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. For a moment, Emma stood frozen, unable to process the unexpected kindness. She had spent so long fighting for respect that she couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was too much, too fast. But as she looked into Dominic's eyes, she realized something she hadn't expected. He wasn't just the Mafia boss. He was something more, someone who valued loyalty, someone who recognized her worth. And in that moment, her world began to shift. The room remained still as Dominic stood before Emma, his gaze soft yet unwavering. She stood there, her heart still racing, her mind unable to process the turn of events. The weight of his words, so unexpectedly kind, left her breathless. He wasn't just some powerful man with a reputation for ruthless behavior. He had seen her, really seen her, and in that moment, everything changed. The silence between them lingered for a few seconds before Dominic finally broke it, his voice now calm and steady. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said, his eyes filled with a quiet sincerity that surprised Emma. She hadn't expected an apology from someone like him. His presence alone had always been a source of intimidation, but now, there was something else, something gentler. "You don't deserve to be treated that way," Dominic continued. Emma could barely form words, her mind struggling to catch up with what was happening. The boss, the man who controlled everything around her, had just fired her superior and was now speaking to her like an equal. She had always been invisible to her employers, but not to him. Not now. "Thank you," Emma finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. It felt strange to speak those words, but it was all she could offer in return for his unexpected act of kindness. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've been here for a while now. You're good at your job," he said, his tone casual, but Emma could tell there was more behind his words. He wasn't just acknowledging her work. He was giving her something more. Something she hadn't had in years. Respect. "I need someone reliable," he added. Emma felt a flutter of uncertainty in her chest. Was he offering her something more than just a simple thank you? She couldn't help but wonder if she was imagining things. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hesitant but curious. Dominic gave her a small smile, his lips twitching slightly as though he were about to say something important. "I'm offering you a position," he said, his voice unwavering. "Not as a waitress. Not as someone who serves drinks and clears tables. I need someone I can trust to handle things. Someone who isn't afraid to speak up." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined this. To go from being invisible, from barely scraping by, to being offered a position that might change everything. She had always dreamed of something more, but had never dared to hope it could happen. "I don't understand," she said, still processing his words. "You're not just offering me another job, are you?" Dominic's expression softened as he stepped closer to her, his presence filling the space between them. "No, Emma," he said. "I'm offering you a chance to be more than what you've been. You've earned it." His words, so simple yet so powerful, struck her deeply. Emma had always fought to be seen, to be respected, but she had never thought someone like Dominic would see her. She had worked countless hours, taken on extra shifts, endured humiliation, and kept her head down just to make ends meet. Now, she was being given an opportunity to rise above it all. Dominic studied her for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. "You don't have to decide now," he added, "but I want you to think about it. You'll have a place here with me, and I'll make sure you're protected. No one will treat you like that again." Emma could feel her chest tighten as his words sank in. It was almost too good to be true. She had been nothing but a pawn in this world for so long, just another face in the crowd. But now, Dominic was offering her a chance to step into the light, to be more than just the invisible waitress who kept the tables clean and the drinks full. "I need to think about it," she said, her voice barely audible, but filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Dominic nodded, his eyes understanding. "Take your time. But know this, if you decide to take this chance, you'll be part of something bigger than yourself. And I'll make sure you never feel small again." Emma swallowed, her mind racing. What could this mean for her? Could she really accept such an offer? The idea of leaving behind the life she knew, the life that had kept her grounded in a world where she was always on the bottom, was terrifying. But at the same time, the promise of something more, something better, was too tempting to ignore. As Dominic turned to walk away, he paused for a moment and glanced over his shoulder. "And Emma," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you're not alone in this anymore. You've got someone watching your back." The words settled into her mind like a seed, growing roots that dug deep into her heart. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. Something was changing, and for the first time in a long while, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. "I've never been treated like this in my life," Emma thought as she walked through the restaurant's kitchen, the weight of Dominic's words still heavy on her heart. She had never allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be seen, respected, or even valued beyond her role as a waitress. But now, Dominic, The man who controlled everything around her had offered her something far beyond a simple job. He had offered her dignity. Emma's hands shook as she set down the tray of dishes and paused, leaning against the cool counter. She closed her eyes, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed her since Dominic's unexpected intervention. Was it possible? Could this actually be the beginning of a new chapter for her? Could she truly step out of the shadows of her past and into a life where she was no longer invisible? The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and possibility. Dominic's presence at the restaurant became a constant, and Emma couldn't help but notice the change in how she was treated. No longer did she feel like an object, to be ignored or dismissed. Now, she was acknowledged. She was valued. Every time she crossed paths with Dominic, his gaze met hers with a quiet understanding, and though he said little, it was clear that his offer had not just been a passing gesture, it was a promise. As the week passed, Emma found herself wrestling with her decision. The offer loomed over her like a shadow, and while the temptation to accept was strong, there was a part of her that was still afraid. This was a Mafia boss, a man with power and control over the restaurant, over the people around her. She had seen the ruthless side of him, the cold and calculating boss who would stop at nothing to maintain his position. Was it wise to trust him? One evening, as Emma worked late into the night, she found herself cleaning up after a private event in one of the restaurant's elegant dining rooms. The quiet hum of the kitchen's exhaust fan was the only sound in the otherwise empty space, and her mind wandered back to Dominic's words. "You don't have to decide now," he had told her, "but I want you to think about it. You'll have a place here with me, and I'll make sure you're protected. No one will treat you like that again." It was then that she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had always carried himself with such authority, but tonight, there was a hint of something softer in his demeanor. "Emma," he said, his voice low but firm, "have you made up your mind?" For a moment, she stood there, the weight of his question pressing down on her. Could she take the leap? Could she trust this man? This stranger who had shown her more kindness in a few days than anyone had in her entire life? "I need more time," she replied softly, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt inside. "This is a lot to take in." Dominic nodded, his eyes softening. "Take all the time you need. But know this, if you stay, if you take this offer, I'll make sure you never have to feel like you're beneath anyone ever again." Emma's heart fluttered at his words. She had never imagined such a promise could come from someone like him. But here he was, offering her a chance at a life she had only dreamed of. No more humiliation. No more being treated like she didn't matter. But could she really accept this? Could she step into a world she knew so little about, and leave behind everything she had known? Before she could answer, Dominic stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "You've got potential, Emma. I see that. You've got a fire inside you, and I think you're more than capable of handling whatever comes your way." For the first time, Emma felt something stir inside her, a glimmer of hope, a spark of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She had always kept her head down, always been careful not to draw attention to herself, afraid of the consequences. But now, for the first time, she was being seen for who she truly was, and it scared her to think of walking away from this opportunity. "I'll do it," she said finally, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "I'll take the offer." Dominic's eyes gleamed with approval, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Good," he said simply. "Welcome to the team." As the days went by, Emma settled into her new role. She was given more responsibility, more trust, and with each passing day, she grew more confident. She found herself working closely with Dominic, learning the ins and outs of the restaurant, and gaining a new respect from her coworkers. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she wondered if she was in over her head, but there was a sense of pride that filled her every time she walked through those restaurant doors. But the biggest change came not from the job itself, but from the shift in how others saw her. She was no longer the invisible waitress who kept to the shadows. She was someone who had a voice, who had a place in this world. And for the first time, Emma felt like she belonged. Dominic kept his word. He made sure no one would ever treat her like that again. And as Emma stood tall in her new role, she realized that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that could change her life forever. And for the first time in a long while, she was ready to embrace it. The days after Emma's decision felt like a whirlwind. She had stepped into a new world, a world where she wasn't just the invisible waitress anymore, but someone who was starting to matter. Every morning, as she walked through the back door of the restaurant, she felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Dominic kept his word, and the changes were evident. She was given more responsibility and treated with a newfound respect by her colleagues. It wasn't just the higher-ups, either. The other waitstaff, the cooks, and even the cleaners started to treat her differently, like she had a place here, a place of importance. Emma noticed the subtle shift, the way people spoke to her now, the way they listened when she gave suggestions or asked questions. She was no longer the one who was overlooked, the one who was invisible. She was seen. But despite the outward progress, Emma couldn't shake the nagging feeling of unease that lingered in the back of her mind. She still wasn't entirely sure how to navigate this new world she had stepped into. The Mafia boss who had offered her a chance, Dominic, was still a mystery in many ways. Yes, he had been kind, but he was also powerful, dangerous, and deeply entrenched in a world she didn't fully understand. The more she worked with him, the more she realized just how much she didn't know. One evening, after a particularly busy dinner rush, Dominic called Emma into his office. She hadn't expected it, but it seemed like he had something important to discuss. She walked into the dimly lit room, the soft hum of the city beyond the windows barely audible. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, his usual commanding presence softened by the quiet intimacy of the office. He looked up from his paperwork and motioned for her to sit. "Emma," he began, his voice calm but serious, "I need to talk to you about something important." Emma sat down, her heart racing slightly. Had she done something wrong? She hadn't heard any complaints, but she couldn't help the wave of nervousness that washed over her. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, his hands clasped together. "You've been doing great work here," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a level of intensity she wasn't used to. "But I'm afraid things are going to get a little more complicated. There are some changes happening in the business." Emma's pulse quickened. Was he talking about the restaurant? Was it in danger? "What kind of changes?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Dominic hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "There are certain people who are not happy with my decisions lately," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "People who have power in this city, people who want things to stay the way they were. They don't like the way I've been running things." Emma frowned. She knew Dominic was powerful, but the way he spoke made it clear that there were forces at play in his world that she couldn't even begin to understand. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked. Dominic's gaze softened, and he leaned back in his chair. "I need someone I can trust," he said, his voice low but firm. "There's a lot of business going on behind the scenes, and I can't do it all alone. I want you to be part of that, Emma." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Part of it? Was he asking her to get involved in his world, a world filled with danger and power? She had thought she was just here to wait tables, to do her job, and leave. She hadn't signed up for anything more. "I don't understand," she said, her voice quiet but filled with hesitation. Dominic's eyes softened, but there was a hardness beneath them, a reminder of the world he came from. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal," he said, almost as if reading her mind. "But I need someone to help me keep things running smoothly, someone who can handle delicate situations. People in my circle, well, they can be unpredictable. I need someone I can count on." Emma felt a rush of emotions, fear, confusion, and curiosity. This was the moment that would define her future. She could walk away, tell Dominic she wasn't interested, and go back to her quiet life, her comfortable invisibility. But the idea of staying, of being part of something bigger than herself, of having the power to change her own fate, was too tempting to ignore. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," she said, the uncertainty clear in her voice. Dominic studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "I think you are," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You've got what it takes. You've already proven that. All I need is for you to trust me, and trust yourself. This isn't about power or control. It's about survival. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something that matters." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Emma felt the tension, the pull of his offer. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to step into a world that was far from safe, a world where the stakes were higher than anything she had ever known? I need time, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Dominic nodded, his expression softening. Take all the time you need. But when you're ready, you'll know. And I'll be here. Emma stood up slowly, her mind racing with the possibilities. This was the turning point, the moment that could change everything. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life would never be the same. Emma's mind raced as she walked down the narrow hallway, the faint sound of clinking glass and laughter from the main dining room echoing behind her. She had spent the last few days reflecting on Dominic's offer, torn between the life she had known for so long and the new life that seemed to be unfolding in front of her. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her every time she entered the restaurant. Could she really step into this world? Could she trust Dominic, someone who operated in a realm so different from her own? Her heart pounded as she reached the door to the office. It was time. She couldn't put it off any longer. Taking a deep breath, Emma pushed open the door and stepped inside. Dominic was sitting behind his desk, as usual, but this time there was something different about the way he looked at her. His gaze was intense, yet not unkind, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move. Emma, he said, his voice low but steady. I'm glad you came. I knew you'd be ready. Emma hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've thought about it, she began, her voice quieter than usual, as though the weight of her words was too much to bear. And I'm ready. I want to be part of this. I trust you. Dominic's lips curled into a small smile, but his eyes remained focused, studying her. I knew you would be. You've got a lot of potential, Emma. I'm not going to sugarcoat things, though. This is a dangerous game we're in, but I think you're more than capable of handling it. Emma nodded, her stomach fluttering. What do I need to do? Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of seriousness. First things first, you need to understand what you're really stepping into. This business, this world I'm part of, it's not just about running a restaurant. It's about control, power, and influence. There are people who want to bring me down, and they'll use anyone they can to do it. But I don't trust anyone more than I trust you. Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she processed his words. She had never been involved in anything like this, had never even imagined she would be. But the look in Dominic's eyes told her this was no empty offer. He was serious, and he saw something in her that she hadn't yet seen in herself. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was beating wildly in her chest. What do I need to do first? Dominic stood up and walked over to a cabinet, pulling out a folder that he placed on the desk in front of her. This is where it all begins. We have a shipment coming in tomorrow, high stakes. If we do this right, it's going to set us up for months. If we screw it up, it'll be a disaster. Emma opened the folder and saw a series of papers, each one filled with numbers and details she didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear. This was no ordinary business transaction. The stakes were high, and there was no room for error. I'll need you to oversee the operation, Dominic continued. You'll be working directly with the team handling the delivery. Keep an eye on everything. Make sure it goes smoothly. If anything goes wrong, you need to report it to me immediately. I can't afford to have mistakes. Emma swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a part of something bigger, something dangerous. I understand, she said, her voice firm with resolve. I'll make sure everything goes smoothly. Dominic nodded, his gaze never leaving her. I know you will. You've got the instincts for this, Emma. Trust yourself. That's the most important thing you can do. With that, Dominic turned and walked towards the window, his back to her now. You'll be in charge of this operation. There's no turning back once you start. But if you succeed, if you show me what I know you can, this will open doors for you. You'll have power. You'll have influence. Emma stared at the papers in front of her, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her. This was it. She had made her choice. There was no going back. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. I won't let you down. Dominic turned back to face her, a small, approving smile on his lips. I know you won't. As Emma left the office, she felt a surge of adrenaline. This was a new beginning, a new chapter in her life. She had stepped into a world that was foreign to her, a world filled with risks and danger, but also with opportunities that she could never have dreamed of before. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone with power. And for the first time, Emma felt a spark of excitement for what was to come. The game had just begun. The night of the operation arrived faster than Emma had anticipated. She could feel the weight of it, the responsibility of overseeing a high-stakes delivery that could determine her future in Dominic's world. As she stood in the restaurant's back room, her mind raced through every detail. She had prepared herself as best as she could, reviewing the files, learning the logistics, and even meeting with the team that would be handling the delivery. But the pressure of the moment still felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders. This wasn't just about delivering food or drinks to customers. This was a test that would prove she was ready for the world she had stepped into. Dominic had been clear about what was at stake. If anything went wrong, if there was even the slightest hiccup, it would be on her. And she couldn't afford failure. As the clock struck 8 p.m., Emma stood by the back door, waiting for the delivery truck to arrive. The team was already in place, their eyes scanning the dark street outside. The atmosphere in the room was tense, everyone aware of the gravity of the situation. Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of their expectations. They had no idea who she really was, no idea what her life had been before she had met Dominic. They saw her as just another member of the team, but for her, this was more than that. This was her moment to prove she belonged. The truck finally pulled up, the sound of the engine breaking the silence. Emma's heart raced as the back doors swung open, revealing a load of high-end goods, products that were critical to Dominic's business dealings. She gave the team a quick nod, signaling them to get to work. As they unloaded the goods, Emma kept a watchful eye on everything, checking the inventory and ensuring everything was as it should be. The team moved efficiently, but Emma's instincts told her something wasn't right. There was a flicker of movement from the alleyway, a shadow that didn't belong. Her gut tightened, and she instinctively reached for her phone, her mind already calculating the worst-case scenario. She was the one responsible for ensuring the operation went smoothly, and she wasn't going to let anything slip by. Just as she was about to step closer to investigate, one of the team members, a man named Tony, came up to her. His face was pale, his usual confidence replaced with a look of concern. "Emma," he whispered, his voice tight, "something's wrong. I don't think the shipment's what it's supposed to be. I overheard one of the drivers talking to someone on the phone. There's something off about this deal." Emma's pulse quickened, and she immediately reached for her earpiece, making contact with Dominic's security team. "Stay alert," she muttered under her breath, trying to keep her composure. "Something's going on." She knew Dominic was counting on her to handle the situation with discretion, to prevent any chaos from spilling out into the open. But this wasn't just a simple delivery anymore. The stakes had just gotten a lot higher. "Get the shipment inside now," Emma ordered, trying to sound calm despite the rising panic in her chest. "We'll handle the rest inside." Tony nodded and hurried off, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She kept her eyes on the street, the shadows lingering just beyond the reach of the dim streetlights. The unease in her stomach grew stronger with each passing second. As she took a step forward, a car slowly rolled by, the windows tinted so dark that she couldn't make out the driver. But she felt their eyes on her, the weight of their gaze like a burning heat against her skin. She quickly turned away, focusing on the task at hand. There was no room for distraction. As the team moved the shipment into the back room, Emma's mind raced with options. If this was a setup, she needed to get ahead of it. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. She had worked too hard for this moment. Dominic had given her trust, and she wasn't about to lose it now. Inside, the tension in the air thickened as the goods were unloaded and placed carefully in the designated storage area. Emma watched everything unfold, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. But the unease didn't leave her. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Something was wrong, and she wasn't sure if it was just her nerves or if her instincts were right. Just as the last box was placed down, Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message from Dominic. "They know. Be careful. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The urgency of the message hit her like a punch in the gut. The worst-case scenario was playing out before her eyes. The people Dominic had warned her about, the ones who wanted to take him down, were here, and she had to act fast. Emma turned to Tony and the others, her voice low but firm. "We need to move. Now." Her pulse raced as she led the team through the back hallways, the sound of footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. There was no time to waste. As they neared the exit, Emma's mind raced through her options. If the shipment was a trap, they needed to get out without being seen. But with Dominic on his way, she had to trust him to handle whatever was coming. She wasn't alone in this anymore. As they reached the back door, Emma glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the shadows once more. The night had just turned dangerous, and she was about to face a challenge unlike anything she had ever imagined. Emma's heart was pounding as she and the team slipped through the back exit of the restaurant, the cold night air hitting her face like a slap. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins as they moved quickly down the alley, trying to remain unseen. The message from Dominic still echoed in her mind. They know. Be careful. It was all happening so fast. One moment, everything had been under control, and now, the reality of her new life was crashing down on her. She had walked into this world thinking she could handle it. She had been wrong. The city's lights twinkled in the distance, but it felt like they were miles away. Emma's pulse raced as she glanced over her shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. The alley was quiet, but it had the eerie silence of something about to happen. We need to move faster, Emma hissed, her voice low but urgent. The team picked up the pace, but Emma's mind was elsewhere, trying to calculate what was coming next. If Dominic had warned her, then he already knew what was happening. But what did they know? The shipment had seemed normal, but if it wasn't, if this was a trap, she had to find a way to get them all out of here before it was too late. As they reached the end of the alley, Emma's phone buzzed again. It was Dominic. Stay calm. I've got people in place. Wait for me. The relief that flooded through her was immediate, but it didn't last long. There was still danger, still too much uncertainty. They couldn't wait around forever. Come on. Hurry, she urged the team as they rounded the corner. They had almost made it to the main street when a car slowed down beside them, the windows tinted so dark that Emma couldn't see who was inside. The car came to a stop. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. She knew who was in that car, and she knew the game was about to change. Get down, Emma ordered, her voice sharp. She pulled Tony and the others toward the nearest building, crouching low to avoid being seen. They ducked behind a row of dumpsters, the smell of trash mixing with the cold air. The tension was unbearable, and Emma's breath came in short, ragged gasps. She had no idea who was in that car or how much they knew, but one thing was clear. They were being watched. The car sat there for what felt like an eternity. Emma's mind raced as she tried to think of their next move. She couldn't afford to panic. She had to stay calm, had to make sure they didn't make a mistake. Then, as if on cue, the car sped off down the street, disappearing into the night. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. But the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What the hell was that? Tony whispered, his voice laced with fear. Emma didn't answer at first. She was too focused, too alert. We're not safe here, she said finally. We need to get to the rendezvous point now. They didn't waste any more time. Moving as quietly as possible, they made their way down the street, keeping to the shadows, avoiding the streetlights. Every step felt like it could be their last. Emma's mind was still racing, but she had learned to trust her instincts. And right now, her instincts were telling her to get to Dominic, to make sure the team was safe, and to figure out exactly who was behind this. They reached the rendezvous point after what felt like an eternity. It was a small, inconspicuous building. Nothing special, just a simple place that Dominic had used before for meetings. They entered through the back door, their footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. Inside, the air was thick with tension. There were a few people waiting for them, including some of Dominic's men, but it wasn't enough. They needed more protection. They needed answers. Dominic was already there, sitting at a small table with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as they entered, his face unreadable. You made it, he said, his voice calm but laced with authority. I'm glad. Emma barely had time to register his words before the door slammed shut behind them. She turned around, her eyes scanning the room. The door locked with a sharp click. What's going on? She demanded, her voice sharp. Who's after us? Dominic took a slow sip of his drink, never breaking eye contact. It's the Volkovs, he said simply. The name hit Emma like a punch to the stomach. The Volkovs were dangerous, powerful people with ties to every corner of the city. If they were involved, this wasn't just about a simple delivery. It was about something much bigger. Dominic set his glass down and stood up, his expression hardening. They know about the shipment. They know what we're doing. And they won't stop. Until they have control. That's why I need you, Emma. The weight of his words hit her hard. She had been thrust into a world of power and danger without fully understanding what she was getting into. But now, there was no turning back. She had to choose, fight or run. Dominic walked over to her, his presence commanding. I need someone I can trust. Someone who can handle this. You're that person, Emma. You've proven yourself. Emma looked around at the people in the room, Dominic's men, his trusted allies. They all looked to her now, waiting for her response. The pressure was on. The room was heavy with the weight of expectation. She didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to run. She was in this now, fully. And whatever came next, she would face it head on. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. Dominic nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Good, he said. Let's take them down. The hours that followed were a blur of preparation, tension, and calculation. Emma could feel the weight of the decisions she had made, and as Dominic's trusted ally, she was in deeper than she had ever been. The Volkovs had made their move, and now it was up to her to ensure they didn't succeed. She had never imagined that a simple decision to trust Dominic would lead her here, standing at the heart of a battle she barely understood, but was now fully committed to winning. She stood in the room, the sound of hushed voices and hurried movements around her as everyone prepared for the next step. Dominic's men were already in place, ready to secure the perimeter, and his team was meticulously planning their next move. Emma wasn't just an observer anymore. She had been thrust into the role of a key player. She had to prove herself, not just to Dominic, but to herself as well. Emma. Dominic's voice cut through the low murmur of the room. She looked up from the maps and documents scattered before her. His gaze was steady, his face serious. You're going to be in charge of the operation tonight. This is where we draw the line. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The plan was finally coming together, but it was still dangerous. She knew what the Volkovs were capable of. No one in Dominic's world had survived by playing nice. The Mafia was about power, and right now, that power was in her hands. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, but firm. The responsibility was overwhelming, but she had already made her choice. This was her fight, too. Dominic's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Emma saw something in his expression that she had never expected. Trust. I know you can handle it. You've already shown me that. With a final glance, he handed her a phone and a set of keys. Take the car, head to the warehouse. You know what to do. Emma nodded. The plan was simple but risky. The warehouse was a few miles out of the city, an isolated location, perfect for a trap. They were going to lure the Volkovs into a position where they could strike, but if anyone tipped the scales against them, there would be no backup. It was all on her now. She took a deep breath and exited the room, her heart pounding. Every step she took was a reminder that she was crossing a line. She had gone from being the quiet waitress, blending into the background, to someone who had to lead, make decisions, and take risks. She had never expected to be here, but now that she wasn't about to back down. The car ride to the warehouse was tense, each turn and bump in the road making her more aware of how far she had come. She had entered this world cautiously, but now, as the city lights faded behind her, Emma realized there was no going back. Her thoughts raced as she mentally reviewed every detail of the plan. She was in charge of the operation tonight. She had to be sharp, focused, and ready for anything. As she pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the warehouse, her pulse quickened. The place was empty, save for a few parked vehicles. She parked her car and stepped out, the cold air hitting her face. She had been briefed on the layout of the warehouse, the key areas to monitor, and how to engage if things went south. Her eyes scanned the area, looking for any signs of trouble. This wasn't just about the shipment anymore. This was about eliminating the Volkovs before they could strike back at Dominic. She walked briskly toward the entrance, her mind running through the steps ahead. As she entered the warehouse, she could hear the soft hum of the lights overhead, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She had to make sure everything went smoothly, or there would be no escape. Emma, a voice whispered from the shadows. She turned, her hand instinctively reaching for the gun tucked inside her jacket. But it was Tony, one of Dominic's men. The Volkovs are on their way. We've got eyes on them. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was happening. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. She nodded, signaling for Tony to take his position. The plan was about to unfold, and there was no room for mistakes. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Emma stayed alert, every nerve on edge. She could hear the distant sound of tires on gravel, the unmistakable rumble of a car pulling into the lot. The Volkovs were here. Positions, Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Everyone in the warehouse shifted into place, hidden behind crates and equipment, ready to execute the plan. Emma took her own position near the entrance, watching as the first of the Volkovs' men exited their car. Her breath caught in her throat. The stakes had never been higher. The plan was in motion now, and Emma had no choice but to trust that everything would fall into place. She had chosen to stay, chosen to fight, and now there was no turning back. The warehouse was silent except for the distant sounds of movement. The Volkovs had no idea what they were walking into. As the Volkovs made their way deeper into the warehouse, Emma's heart pounded harder. This was her moment. This was where she proved herself. She signaled to Tony, who gave a brief nod, and the operation began. The first shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Emma's pulse raced as everything unfolded around her. There was no time to second-guess, no time to hesitate. It was happening, and Emma was in control. She had made it this far. There was no turning back now. The chaos that followed was almost surreal. The first shot had barely echoed through the warehouse before everything erupted into a frantic, disorienting blur. Emma's instincts kicked in, her training from Dominic and his team now fully coming to the forefront. She moved swiftly, her body instinctively ducking behind a stack of crates, her breath sharp and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The warehouse had come to life with shouts, the screech of tires on gravel, and the sounds of bodies moving quickly, positioning themselves for the confrontation. The plan had been simple: trap the Volkovs, disable their escape, and strike hard and fast. But nothing had prepared Emma for the way her pulse raced or the raw tension in the air. She had been ready for this. At least, she thought she had. But now, as the second round of shots rang out, Emma felt the weight of her responsibility more than ever. She glanced over at Tony, who was positioned across from her, signaling with his hand that they needed to move. She nodded, silently acknowledging the direction they had to take. This was no longer about simply ensuring a smooth operation. It was about survival. As the Volkovs' men moved further into the warehouse, it became clear that they had underestimated the trap. Emma had done everything right, but the stakes had risen exponentially. The Volkovs had come prepared, armed, and ready for a fight. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed across the floor, followed by another burst of gunfire. Emma didn't hesitate. She adjusted her position, keeping a sharp eye on the group of Volkovs approaching the center of the warehouse. There was no time to think about what might happen next. There was only the present, and it was filled with the weight of her actions. Her heart was pounding as she signaled for the rest of Dominic's team to move. They were surrounding the Volkovs now, closing in like a noose tightening around the group. She had to act fast. She darted out from her cover, keeping low to the ground, moving with the precision she had practiced. Her eyes never left the Volkovs. They were distracted, focused on their own positions, unaware of the encirclement closing in on them. Emma made her move, running toward the main entrance to the warehouse. She needed to cut off any possible escape routes. As she reached the door, she froze. In the distance, she saw a flash of headlights, too bright, too fast. The Volkovs weren't just planning to take the shipment. They were planning to escape, and they were bringing reinforcements. Emma's heart dropped. "There's another vehicle," she shouted into her earpiece, her voice urgent. "We've got to move now. This isn't over." The response came quickly. Dominic's voice, calm yet urgent. "I'm on it. Hold your position. You're not alone." Emma's body tensed. She could hear the sound of distant engines roaring to life. It was now or never. She turned back to the team, her mind working in overdrive. They had to make sure the Volkovs didn't get away. "We need to block the exit," she called out, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. "We can't let them leave." Tony and a few others immediately moved into position, taking up defensive positions around the warehouse's main entrance. Emma's eyes scanned the space, her mind still calculating the best way to contain the situation. They had come this far, and there was no way she was going to let the Volkovs slip through their fingers. As the Volkovs' car sped closer, Emma's nerves were razor-sharp. The team was in position, their weapons ready, but there was still the risk that they could lose control of the situation. Emma's mind flashed back to the moment when Dominic had trusted her with this responsibility. She couldn't afford to fail him now. She couldn't afford to fail herself. The sound of the Volkovs' car screeched to a halt as it neared the entrance. It was now or never. Emma's heart beat faster as she signaled the team to move in. They rushed forward, the warehouse now alive with movement as the Volkovs finally realized what was happening. Their plan was unraveling quickly, and it was clear they had underestimated Dominic's reach and Emma's role in it. Emma's breath was steady, despite the fear that tried to creep up on her. She was in control now, and the Volkovs knew it. They had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Emma's team had them trapped. As she moved toward the car, her hand instinctively went to her sidearm. It was time to end this, to make sure the Volkovs wouldn't threaten Dominic's empire again. She approached the vehicle, her eyes locking on the driver's side. The man inside had his hand on his weapon, his face filled with panic. But it was too late. Emma was faster. She drew her gun and pointed it directly at him, her voice cold and commanding. "Get out of the car. Now." The man hesitated, but only for a moment. As the door swung open, Emma's grip tightened on her weapon. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment when they would finally take control. The Volkovs' plan had failed, and Emma had made sure of it. She glanced over at Dominic, who stood by the doorway, his eyes on her. He didn't need to say anything. She had done exactly what he had asked her to do. And in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was part of this world now, part of the empire Dominic had built. And nothing would ever be the same. The aftermath of the Volkov confrontation left the warehouse still as death, the smell of gunpowder lingering in the air like a bad omen. The tension, once thick and suffocating, was slowly beginning to dissipate, but the weight of what had just transpired pressed heavily on Emma's chest. She looked around at Dominic's team, who had successfully trapped the Volkovs and neutralized the immediate threat. The operation had gone smoother than expected, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. As the last of the Volkov men were cuffed and led out by Dominic's guards, Emma found herself standing in the center of the warehouse, alone. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the night was fading, leaving behind a gnawing sense of uncertainty. Dominic approached her, his calm demeanor hiding the storm that must have been raging inside him. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes studying her as if weighing her very soul. For a moment, the warehouse was silent except for the faint rustling of guards moving in the background. "You did well," Dominic finally said, his voice low and steady. Emma didn't know how to respond. She felt like she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. But there was no time for reflection now. "Is it over?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic's lips tightened, his gaze sharp as he considered her question. "Not by a long shot," he replied. "But tonight, we've sent a message." The silence that followed his words seemed to stretch out, heavy with meaning. Dominic was right. The Volkovs were just one, part of a much larger game, and while they had managed to outmaneuver them tonight, there was no guarantee that this victory would last. Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had made the decision to trust Dominic, to take control of her future, but this world, his world, was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic took a step closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Now we clean up. We make sure there are no loose ends, no witnesses, and we prepare for the next move. The Volkovs may have lost tonight, but they'll regroup. They'll come after us again." Emma's stomach turned. She hadn't realized just how deep the danger ran. This wasn't just about controlling a restaurant or a shipment of goods. This was about survival in a world where power was everything, and everyone was looking to take what wasn't theirs. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. Dominic's gaze softened, and for the first time in a while, he seemed almost human. "I need you to stay alert, Emma. We've got work to do, but we're in this together. No more second-guessing. You've earned your place here, and I'll make sure you're protected." Emma didn't know what to say to that. The promise of protection was comforting, but it didn't erase the fear that was gnawing at her. She had entered this world with the idea that she could play by the rules, that she could carve out a life for herself without losing who she was. But as she looked around at the people in the warehouse, the bloodstains on the floor, and the men she had just helped take down, she knew there was no turning back now. She was in too deep. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. Dominic nodded approvingly, his lips curling into a small smile. "I know you are. But remember, Emma, this world is unforgiving. You've got to be ruthless if you want to survive. If you ever forget that, you won't last." His words were a warning, but Emma didn't flinch. She had already made her choice. She had already stepped into this world, and there was no going back. "I understand," she said, the weight of the moment sinking in. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, then turned and gestured for her to follow him. "Let's move. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they walked out of the warehouse, the air was still thick with tension, but Emma's steps were more sure now. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a bystander in her own life. She had power now, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it from her. The world of Dominic Castellano was dangerous, unpredictable, and full of enemies. But it was also full of opportunities, and for the first time, Emma felt like she could be more than just a part of the background. She could be someone who mattered. As they stepped into the night, the city lights shining brightly ahead, Emma realized that this was only the beginning. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The following days were a blur of meetings, decisions, and strategy. Emma felt like she was constantly on edge, her mind running through the operations as she tried to keep up with the pace of Dominic's world. The Volkov threat had been neutralized, but Emma knew it wasn't over. The underworld was always in motion, and in this world, peace was a fleeting illusion. She had been thrust into a role she never imagined she would have, and with every passing moment, the reality of it all settled deeper into her bones. But as much as she tried to focus on the task at hand, her mind kept returning to the same question. Was she really ready for this? She had come so far, from a waitress in a bustling restaurant to being Dominic's right hand in a world where betrayal and power were the only currencies that mattered. The weight of her decisions hung heavy on her shoulders, but there was no time for doubt. Dominic trusted her, and that trust was not something she could afford to break. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, Dominic asked to see her in his office. The tension between them had shifted in the past few days. While they had always worked side by side, now there was something more, an unspoken understanding that went beyond the professional. As Emma walked into his office, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the city skyline, his posture relaxed but still commanding. "Come in," he said without turning around. "I've been thinking about the next step. We've dealt with the Volkovs, but the real battle is just beginning." Emma stood there for a moment, her heart pounding. She had seen this side of Dominic before, the calculated, driven man who wouldn't rest until his empire was secure. But now, there was something different in his voice. It was almost personal. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty brewing inside her. Dominic turned to face her, his gaze sharp. "I've got a lead on someone who's been under our radar. A rival family, one that's been trying to infiltrate our operations for months. They're getting close, Emma. Too close. We need to strike first." Emma's mind raced. Another threat, another battle. She had just dealt with the Volkovs, but this was different. She could feel the shift in the air, the growing tension that came with Dominic's words. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice quiet but determined. Dominic walked over to his desk, retrieving a file from the drawer. He slid it across the table to her. "This is the information we have on the rival family. Their leader's name is Carmine Rossi. He's been making moves in our territory, trying to take control of key assets." He paused, looking at Emma intently. "I need you to go in, gather intel, find out what they're planning. We need to know their next move before they make it." Emma took the file from the desk, her fingers brushing against Dominic's as she did. The contact sent a jolt through her, but she forced herself to focus on the task. This wasn't about her feelings. It was about the job. "I'll handle it," she said, her voice low but confident. Dominic nodded, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something deeper, something unspoken. "I know you will," he said, his voice softening for just a moment. Emma stood there for a moment longer, unsure of what to say. There was a tension between them that hadn't been there before, a complexity that she couldn't ignore. But she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the mission. This was her world now. This was her fight. She wasn't going to back down. She wasn't going to let anything stop her. "When do I start?" she asked, breaking the silence. Dominic's gaze hardened once again, his focus returning to the task at hand. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice resolute. "I've set up a meeting with one of our contacts. You'll meet them and get the information you need. Make it count." Emma nodded, tucking the file under her arm. She knew what was at stake. The Volkovs were just one obstacle in a much larger game, and Carmine Rossi was the next challenge she had to face. As she turned to leave the office, Dominic's voice stopped her. "Emma," he said, his tone almost hesitant. She turned back to face him, her heart racing. "Be careful," he added, his eyes meeting hers with a look that was hard to read. It wasn't just the usual warning. There was something else there, something deeper. "I will," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. As she walked out of the office, the weight of her responsibilities settled in once more. She had come so far, but now she was facing something that could change everything. Carmine Rossi wasn't just another rival. He was someone who could take everything Dominic had built and everything Emma had worked for away in an instant. She had to stop him before he got the chance. The city outside seemed different now. The lights were brighter, the streets more chaotic. It was like everything had shifted, and Emma was at the center of it. There was no going back. She was in this world now, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. The next morning, Emma's heart was in her throat as she sat in the sleek black car, the engine's hum almost too loud in the tense silence. Dominic had sent her on the mission to meet their contact, and she knew this was no ordinary task. Carmine Rossi was more than just a rival. He was a threat that had to be neutralized before he could gain any ground. The thought of getting involved in something this dangerous made her blood run cold, but the urgency in Dominic's voice the night before had made her realize how much was at stake. This wasn't just a simple meetup. This was about finding out everything they could about Rossi and his plans. They had to be 2 steps ahead, always. The car pulled to a stop in front of a rundown building in a quiet part of town. Emma had been to places like this before, places where the shadows seemed to have eyes, and the air was thick with secrets. It wasn't the kind of place where you made friends, and definitely not a place where you asked questions. But it was the perfect location to meet someone who operated in the shadows, just like her. She stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath before walking toward the entrance. The building was almost too quiet, its cracked windows and faded paint a testament to years of neglect. The door creaked open when she pushed it, revealing a dimly lit interior. A few figures sat at tables in the back, their eyes flicking toward her as she entered. She scanned the room quickly, looking for any sign of the contact. And then she saw him, a tall man with a thick beard and sharp eyes, sitting alone at the back table. He didn't move, just watched her approach with an air of detachment. "You're Emma, right?" the man asked as she took a seat across from him. His voice was deep, but his eyes were calculating, as if he was already sizing her up. "I am," she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "You're the contact?" The man nodded, but there was something about his gaze that didn't sit right with her. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts, and something told her that this meeting wasn't going to be as straightforward as Dominic had hoped. "I'm Marco," he said, his voice casual. "I work for Dominic's team, but I've got my own network, my own eyes and ears. He doesn't trust many people, but I've been keeping an eye on Carmine Rossi for some time now." Emma's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She had expected something like this. Rossi had a network, and they needed every bit of information they could get. But she hadn't expected Marco to be so nonchalant about it. "What do you know about Rossi?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Marco leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "He's a calculated bastard," he said, his voice low. "He's been making moves in the city for a while, but he's smart about it. Doesn't show his hand too early. He's got people in all the right places, and he's not afraid to use them. His reach is bigger than you think, but he's trying to take over everything, control the shipments, the underground trade, all of it. And Dominic's been in his way." Emma's mind was racing as she processed Marco's words. Rossi's plan was even more dangerous than they had imagined. It wasn't just about business. It was about power, total control over the city, and Dominic was standing in his way. We can't let him gain any ground, Emma said, her voice firm. What's our next move? Marco's gaze shifted, a hint of something darker flickering in his eyes. We need to hit him where it hurts. Find his weak spots and exploit them before he gets too comfortable. He's planning something big, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. All I know is that he's been meeting with people behind closed doors, making alliances with some of the most dangerous players in the city. If we don't act fast, he'll outsmart us. Emma's heart sank as the weight of the situation settled in. They were fighting a war on two fronts now. Not only did they have to deal with Rossi's influence, but they also had to figure out how to dismantle his network without tipping their hand. How do we get to him? She asked, her mind already working through the possibilities. Marco hesitated for a moment, then slid a piece of paper across the table. This is an address. A meeting place where Rossi's been meeting with his allies. I've been tracking his movements, and it's the best lead we've got. You go in, find out who he's meeting with, and get the intel we need. Once we know what he's planning, we can act. Emma studied the paper carefully. It was a small address in an area known for its quiet, out-of-the-way spots, perfect for secret meetings. She knew it wouldn't be easy to get in without raising suspicion, but it was the only lead they had. I'll take it from here, she said, standing up. I'll get the information. Marco gave her a sharp look, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. Be careful, Emma, he said, his voice serious. This is bigger than you think. Rossi won't go down without a fight. Emma nodded, her jaw set. She knew the risks. She wasn't afraid. As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play here. There was more to this than just a power struggle. Rossi was playing a game, and he was good at it. But she would outplay him. She had to. For Dominic. And for herself. She wasn't about to let anyone take control of the city, not if she had a say in it. The address Marco had given her led to a rundown building on the outskirts of the city, hidden among a row of derelict warehouses. The streets were quieter here, the air heavy with the scent of rust and concrete. Emma's instincts were on high alert as she parked her car a few blocks away, the darkness of the night adding an eerie silence to the otherwise empty street. She had done everything Dominic asked of her, but this time felt different. She could feel the danger seeping into her bones, creeping up the back of her neck, and every part of her screamed that she was walking into the heart of something far more dangerous than she had imagined. This wasn't just about gathering intel anymore. This was about taking control of her future, protecting the empire that Dominic had built, and making sure that no one could threaten the fragile peace they had fought so hard for. She took a deep breath and checked the time. No turning back now. As she approached the building, she kept to the shadows, moving with precision. She was familiar with the layout from Marco's description, and she knew exactly where to enter. The back door was slightly ajar, and she slipped inside without a sound. The dim light inside cast long shadows on the cracked floor, and Emma's every step echoed through the emptiness of the corridor. She moved carefully, listening for any sounds, any sign of life. The building felt abandoned, but Emma knew better than to trust appearances. She had been in situations like this before. The meeting place was at the end of the hall, a door marked only with a number, its presence almost too ordinary in this otherwise grim environment. She stopped just outside the door, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She had to act fast. With a steady hand, Emma pushed the door open just a crack, enough to peek inside. She saw two men sitting at a table, their heads bent in quiet conversation. They didn't notice her immediately, and she took the opportunity to step inside, keeping her back to the wall, staying as silent as possible. Her eyes scanned the room quickly. One man was tall, with a scar running down his cheek, and the other, shorter but broader, had the unmistakable look of a veteran in the business. They were discussing something in low voices, too far from her to make out the specifics. She couldn't risk getting closer. Instead, she pulled out her phone and activated the recording app, silently capturing every word they said. The tall man spoke first, his voice low but clear. Rossi wants everything ready for tomorrow. The final piece of the puzzle is in place. Once we control the docks, the city is ours. The other man, the one with the scar, nodded. I've got people in position. No one will know what hit them. We'll shut down Dominic's operations for good. Emma's pulse quickened. Rossi was making his move, and it was bigger than she thought. This wasn't just about the shipments. They were planning to take down Dominic entirely. She had to warn him. The taller man continued. We'll make the move at dawn. The docks are where it all happens. We'll take control of the shipments, cut off the supply, and then the rest of the city will follow. The shorter man smiled, but it was cold and merciless. And then we'll have everything. The businesses, the territory. The city will bow to us. Emma clenched her fists, feeling the weight of their words settle in her chest. This wasn't just a business move. This was a declaration of war, and she had to stop it. She stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and exited the room. As she made her way out of the building, the weight of what she had just overheard pressed down on her. The Volkovs weren't just trying to take over the business. They were trying to destroy everything Dominic had built. And Emma wasn't about to let that happen. She reached her car and pulled out her phone, quickly dialing Dominic's number. He picked up on the second ring. Emma, are you in position? His voice was calm, but Emma could tell he was on edge. Dominic, they're planning something big, she said, her voice low but urgent. They're going to hit the docks at dawn. They have everything set up. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, everything? Dominic asked, his tone shifting to one of seriousness. They've been moving pieces into place for a while now, she said, her heart racing. They're taking control of the shipments, cutting us off. If we don't stop them now, they'll have the city. Dominic's voice was ice cold. We can't let that happen. You did good, Emma. Get to safety. I'll make the calls. No, Emma said, her voice sharp. I'm not running. I'm part of this now, and I'm not going to sit back while they destroy everything you've worked for. I'll be there at dawn. We stop them together. Dominic hesitated for a moment. Emma, he said, his voice softer now. I know you've earned your place here, but this is dangerous. I won't risk losing you. Emma's chest tightened, but she stood firm. I'm not backing down. Let's end this. Dominic didn't say anything for a moment, but Emma could hear the weight of his thoughts in the silence. Finally, he spoke. All right. We move at dawn. Stay close. We'll do this together. As Emma hung up the phone, she knew there was no going back. The battle was about to begin, and everything she had done so far had led to this moment. The Volkovs had underestimated her, and now they were going to pay for it. With Dominic at her side, Emma was ready to take back control, and nothing was going to stop her. In this gripping story of power, betrayal, and resilience, follow Emma as she navigates the dangerous underworld of organized crime, where alliances are tested and loyalty is everything. From being an overlooked waitress to becoming an integral part of Dominic's empire, Emma must prove herself in a world where trust is earned and enemies lurk in every shadow. The stakes are higher than ever as Emma uncovers a plot that could destroy everything Dominic has worked for. As the danger escalates, Emma must decide where her loyalties lie, all while battling a growing attraction to the mysterious and powerful Dominic. This thrilling tale combines the raw intensity of crime with the unexpected twists of romance stories, showing how a simple choice can change a person's fate forever. In the midst of all the danger, the undeniable chemistry between Emma and Dominic grows, adding a layer of depth to the already intense drama. The stakes continue to rise as they face a new threat, forcing Emma to confront not just the criminal world, but her own emotions. With every choice they make, Emma and Dominic are drawn closer together, and their shared journey takes them deeper into the world of intrigue and passion. For anyone who loves a story where danger and desire collide, this captivating narrative delivers all the excitement of romance stories set against a backdrop of betrayal, power struggles, and the fight for control. The complex relationship between Emma and Dominic adds a unique twist to the world of crime, making this an unforgettable chapter in the realm of thrilling romance stories. As the story reaches its climax, the twists and turns will leave readers on the edge of their seats, eagerly awaiting the next chapter in this heart-pounding tale of love, loyalty, and survival.